When I read Brooklyn Beckham's statement, my jaw hit the floor. Obviously, I had to rely on seeing it from somebody else because he famously has blocked me, as is Nicola. But yes, it was jaw-dropping. What we've never had since this story really kicked off in April is anybody on the record from either side talking about it. You know, there's been lots of briefing wars and there's been lots of, many stories, but actually anyone talking about it, you know, has been a no-no. So, I mean, it was just like, whoa, you know, I can't recall a moment like it really, when you've just gone, well, he's gone for his parents, particularly his mother, in like the most, you know, jaw-dropping way. So there's been a flurry of stories in recent weeks, clearly briefed by Nicola and Brooklyn, about how they don't like how they believe David and Victoria Beckham have positioned his wife, Nicola. You know, the stories that have stated that David and Victoria believe that she's controlled him, that she's a narcissist. He insists he can make up his own mind. He's like, you know, we saw the story about Brooklyn and Nicola instructing their lawyers at Shillings to go to David and Victoria's lawyers. We've seen lots of accusations that David and Victoria's briefing has been sexist, and so he's just had enough. You know, he has been silent for years. You know, he's been silent on his family. He's been very, you know, very active on social media, very open about many things. But you know, I think we just all assumed he was happy being a member of the very wealthy Beckham dynasty. I don't believe that Brooklyn Beckham wrote this statement. I think if you can compare, he wrote a love letter to Nicola about a year or so ago, and it was just littered with grammatical mistakes and spelling errors. And I just think, without being too mean to him, it's far too sophisticated for him to have written. And I think as much as, you know, perhaps that's the norm, you know, what celebrity does write their own statements or their own, you know, their things, you know, or most of them have someone to write their Instagram posts for them these days. But I think what will be worrying for the Beckhams is that they already think that Brooklyn, living in America with Nicola, near to her family, they have a lot to do with the Peltz family, who are a very powerful family. It just speaks to their view that their son is being manipulated by Nicola and her parents. So I think probably one of the most hurtful things about this post is the accusation that Victoria, who loves to dance, danced inappropriately with Brooklyn on his wedding day. He claims that she hijacked the dance. The truth is that Brooklyn and Nicola had their dance early on to Elvis Presley's I Can't Help Falling in Love. And then some hours later, Mark Anthony performed. And at that point, Brooklyn and Victoria were brought together for a dance to one of Mark Anthony's songs. They were joined by David, Harper, Romeo, and Romeo's then girlfriend, Mia. So it was like a family dance. And my understanding, what I've been told, is that actually there was suspicion on the day, and still suspicion now, that Nicola's family, for some reason, didn't want Brooklyn to have a dance with his mother, which seems awfully strange given that earlier on in the night they had their first dance. Nicola also had a dance with her father. So it was just and also it was 11 o'clock. It was 11 o'clock at night. You know, we all know that the Beckhams, you know, they like to have fun, they like to have a drink, and you know, Victoria, she danced for a career once. Okay, some might argue not very well, but she likes to boogie. We've seen her. She's put pictures up on her own social media of her dancing in many. I mean, there was Brooklyn's 21st birthday party where she was dancing with Brooklyn and Nicola and having a jolly old time. So I think there is some real upset here that they've really tried to shame Victoria, and I don't think it's gone down very well at all. So in the statement, he reveals why he didn't invite his parents to his vow renewal service last year. But actually, he didn't just not invite them, he didn't tell them. So they didn't not only tell David and Victoria, they didn't tell their grandparents, they didn't tell their siblings. You know, that was incredibly hurtful for the whole Beckham family. They do have those bad memories of their wedding day. And fine, but this is a wedding that cost over £3 million. You know, it was the most lavish, opulent wedding. And the wedding that Nicola wanted, you know, initially they were going to get married in the UK. They were going to have a sort of British country wedding. And they decided in the end, actually, we'll get married where the bride is from America. And it was no big deal at the time. So they had this perfect wedding. And it just feels awfully spoiled, doesn't it, of them to say, oh, actually, you know, because you know, my mum danced with me inappropriately, we're not going to invite them to the vow renewal. I mean, it just smacks of somebody who is so utterly privileged and spoiled. But I mean, at least we know now, because we've wondered for a long time what the reason was. So in his post, Brooklyn says that, you know, your value within the Beckham family is about photo opportunities, whether you are there on the big day, on the big moments, to support her. Now, we've seen that with her Paris fashion events. You know, it's a really, you know, you see the kids on the front row. We've seen that for years, right? And it is very important to her. But the family they've created is what they would say is very supportive. You know, you know, yes, I suppose if you're in America and you've got to fly all the way over to Paris to sit in your mum's, you know, sit in the front row of your mum's fashion show, must be very irritating. And you know, as we know, they live their life through social media. You know, the day they joined social media, like the British media changed, because ever since then we've just had photo after photo, video after video. So yeah, I suspect there is some pressure on them to be there for the big moments. We've seen this wonderful video today of David Beckham's Netflix documentary launch just over 2 years ago. And it was when they were friendly at that time. And Nicola looks furious to be there. In fact, I was there on that night and she did have a real face on her. You know, but they jetted in from Los Angeles to be there. So I do have that sympathy with him. However, what they didn't mention was that when Brooklyn Beckham launched his hot sauce, Cloud 23, after his dad's football shirt at LA Galaxy and Real Madrid, David and Victoria were there. It was in Whole Foods, around the corner. Like, they were there. They were supporting. You know, that is what they do as a family. And so I think they would be very upset to think that actually they've put quite a lot of effort in to their son and his career. And also, you know, they went to the premiere of Nicola's movie Lola. You know, they wanted to be there. They feel like this family. We support them, and I guess they expect the same back. But what we didn't see in that clip or in that post was Brooklyn accepting that perhaps his parents have done the same for him and Nicola in the past. So Nicola is very passionate about dogs, and there obviously, you know, there are lots of dogs displaced in Los Angeles, which Nicola has got very involved in, which is a very kind act, I guess. But she asked Victoria, so Brooklyn claims, she asked Victoria to help and Victoria declined. Now, I guess Victoria would argue that she's got other charity things that she contributes to. But I mean, it's a little bit petty, I think, that one, don't you? The wedding dress has been a bone of contention since 2022 when they got married. In fact, just after there was a whole hoo-ha about it. Now, I suppose if you were marrying Victoria Beckham's son, you'd probably quite like her to make your wedding dress, wouldn't you? And I think initially she was going to. Brooklyn, in his post, claims that she pulled out at the 11th hour, and you know, with the inference that poor Nicola didn't have a wedding dress to wear on her wedding day. As the story emerged, the stylist has come out today and said that dress, the Valentino dress, was a year in the making. So again, it just feels like there's an awful lot of spinning going on here that is kind of perhaps unfair for the Beckhams, and they're not going to respond. There's no way they're going to respond to this. They're going to, you know, not complain, not explain, and in the hope that perhaps once again this can all go away. But I think a lot of damage has been done. So we've seen all these memes, and some of them are just brilliant. They're hilarious. Probably hilarious if you're not Victoria Beckham. And she famously has a very good sense of humour. And I think a lot of her sense of humour has got her through these last months where, you know, she is distraught that her son is estranged from her. But I don't think she's going to be finding them very funny. In fact, she probably isn't looking. I think it will be very difficult for her not to look because she lives her life on social media. But I think this will be one time when she might be avoiding Instagram. The real feud began in April last year when it was the run-up to David's 50th birthday. And of course, we know the Beckhams don't do things by halves. So there were many events planned for his milestone. Obviously, Nicola and Brooklyn were invited to all of them, bar a boys' trip to Scotland a fishing trip to the Scottish Highlands, which Brooklyn was, but Nicola wasn't, it was boys only. So in his statement, Brooklyn does explain why he was absent from all of them, but he insists that they were in London, which we knew, but they were trying to have a private meeting with David and Victoria, rather than join in the big family, the wider family occasions. And at the time, Nicola and Brooklyn briefed this, but actually more recent, in this statement, he says that Nicola wasn't welcome at any meeting. So that's all very new. And look, who knows if that's true or not, but I do certainly think that the Beckhams have always tried to be inclusive to all of their children's friends. Things obviously went wrong with Nicola, but the fact is there were many opportunities for them to see David and Victoria, and they chose not to take them. It was pretty bad timing for David today. He had a long-standing engagement in Davos, and obviously had to sit before the press. He knew there were going to be journalists there, and of course he wasn't there to talk about his family. But it was only a few hours before that he found out. They didn't find out until, look, they wouldn't have seen on Instagram either because they're blocked. So by the time it seeped through, it was probably, in fact, I think it was probably about 6:30 last night that they found out about this. And they found out secondhand. And then a few hours later, he's got to sit there facing, and journalists did ask him, do you have a, and he I think was quite cross at being asked. So the truth is they're not going to respond. They will never speak of this. And I think the worry is, what's Brooklyn going to do next? Brooklyn and Nicola, what are they going to do next?